Today is May 22nd, 2025. The brutal war in Ukraine continues its devastating march forward, a conflict initiated by Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion more than 3 long years ago, in February 2022. Ukraine, a nation fighting valiantly for its very existence and sovereignty, now finds itself at an exceptionally critical juncture. Its people, demonstrating remarkable resilience, endure unimaginable hardship day after day. The international landscape of support, once a seemingly steadfast pillar, is now showing signs of shifting, presenting new and urgent challenges for Kiev. It is absolutely crucial that we, as observers and participants in global affairs, understand the gravity of this evolving reality and its profound implications for the future of Ukraine and indeed for international order. A particularly stark challenge confronting Ukraine is the significant and worrying decline in military aid from the United States. The pipeline of assistance, previously authorized during the Biden administration, is rapidly dwindling. Current projections indicate that these crucial deliveries are expected to be exhausted within the coming weeks, a terrifying prospect for a nation at war. Compounding this precarious situation, the current Trump administration has, as of this date, not announced any renewed commitment to substantial assistance packages. This abrupt and looming void in support directly and severely impacts Ukraine's capacity to defend its territory and its people. The steady flow of essential military resources, from ammunition to advanced weaponry, is now shrouded in an unsettling uncertainty, a development that undoubtedly benefits Moscow's strategic calculations. Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to be keenly aware of this shifting dynamic and is seemingly determined to exploit it to his advantage. He has consistently rejected international calls for even a temporary 30-day ceasefire, a basic humanitarian gesture. Furthermore, any semblance of peace talks has been effectively stalled, largely due to Putin's insistence on maximalist demands that equate to Ukrainian capitulation. Intelligence reports and analyses suggest that Putin is operating under the assumption, or perhaps the bet, that Ukraine's defensive position will inevitably deteriorate as US aid diminishes. He likely believes that time is his greatest ally, allowing Russia to outlast Ukraine's resistance while Moscow continues to receive varying degrees of support and material from countries like China, Iran, and North Korea, further complicating the conflict's geometry. It is undeniable that the United States and Europe have, up to this point, provided a very substantial level of support to Ukraine. Combined, these allies have allocated approximately $282 billion in total aid, encompassing financial, humanitarian, and military assistance, according to meticulously compiled data from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. This support has been nothing short of vital. It has empowered Ukraine to resist an aggressor with vastly superior numbers and resources, shocking many global observers. However, the current funding gap, particularly with the uncertainty surrounding US contributions, is stark and deeply concerning. A new, sustainable, and powerfully effective financial mechanism is now desperately needed. This is where Europe must step forward and consider bold, decisive actions to fill the breach. A significant, largely untapped financial reservoir exists today, one that holds the potential to dramatically alter Ukraine's fortunes in this protracted conflict. We are talking about approximately $300 billion in Russian sovereign assets that are currently frozen. The overwhelming majority of these funds, a staggering sum, are held within financial institutions located in Europe. These assets were prudently and rightly immobilized by international governments shortly after Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. This was, without question, a strong and commendable initial response from the global community, signaling condemnation of Russia's aggression. Now, however, with the war dragging into its 4th year and Ukraine facing new pressures, a more decisive, more impactful action is urgently required. These frozen funds represent a powerful, readily available tool. In June of 2024, leaders of the G7 nations did take a noteworthy step in this direction. They reached an agreement to provide Ukraine with approximately $50 billion in loans. The innovative aspect of this plan is that these loans are to be repaid primarily using the interest income generated from the immobilized Russian assets. This is certainly a positive development, a clever financial maneuver, and a testament to Allied ingenuity. However, when we consider the sheer scale of Ukraine's needs, the daily cost of war, the humanitarian crisis, the future reconstruction, this sum, while significant, is simply not enough. The devastation inflicted upon Ukraine's infrastructure and economy is profound. Therefore, we must advocate for a bolder approach, the outright seizure of the full $300 billion principal. Capturing the principal amount of these frozen assets, not merely skimming off the interest payments, would represent a true game changer for Ukraine. These funds could provide Kiev with a much-needed, sustainable, and substantial source of long-term assistance. Imagine the possibilities. These assets could be directly channeled to procure the desperately needed advanced weaponry and ammunition for Ukrainian forces on the front lines. They could be strategically invested to fund the rapid development and expansion of Ukraine's own domestic defense industrial base, reducing reliance on external supplies. Furthermore, these funds would be critical in maintaining Ukraine's macroeconomic stability amidst the severe strains of wartime, and crucially, they could begin to finance the monumental, multi-generational task of national reconstruction, which current estimates place in the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. European countries have already demonstrated a profound and admirable commitment to supporting Ukraine since the onset of Russia's aggression. Their contributions have been multifaceted and extensive, ranging from direct military aid and training to substantial financial support packages. European nations have also led the way in implementing innovative economic measures, such as the price cap on Russian oil, designed to curtail Moscow's ability to fund its war machine. They have collectively enacted no fewer than 17 distinct sanctions packages targeting various sectors of the Russian economy. These actions have undoubtedly been impactful and have imposed significant costs on the Kremlin. Seizing the frozen Russian sovereign assets is the next logical, morally justified, and strategically powerful step. It would unequivocally underscore Europe's unwavering resolve to support Ukraine's fight for freedom and its very survival. The legal justification for seizing these Russian sovereign assets is not only present, but also remarkably robust, grounded in established principles of international law. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, launched in February 2022, constitutes a flagrant and undeniable violation of one of the most fundamental tenets of the international legal order, the prohibition against aggression. This principle is enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Indeed, the United Nations General Assembly, in an overwhelming display of global condemnation, passed a resolution in 2022 decrying Russia's actions as an act of aggression. This is not a matter of nuanced interpretation or a debatable grey area. It is a blatant, egregious breach of international law, and such breaches must carry tangible consequences. In this context, the seizure of Russian state assets can be legitimately viewed as a lawful countermeasure under international law. Russia, by virtue of its status as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, possesses veto power. It has consistently and cynically wielded this veto to block any meaningful action by the Security Council aimed at holding Moscow accountable for its aggression or providing collective security responses to the crisis in Ukraine. This effectively paralyzes one of the primary international mechanisms designed to maintain global peace and security. Faced with such obstructionism within the UN's core security body, international law permits states to take proportionate countermeasures to respond to another state's wrongful acts. Seizure of assets falls within this category of permissible responses. Furthermore, there is an undeniable and clear legal obligation incumbent upon Russia. As the aggressor state, Russia must provide full reparation to Ukraine for the vast and catastrophic war damages it has inflicted. The sheer scale of destruction is horrifying. Cities leveled, critical infrastructure obliterated, countless lives lost or irrevocably damaged, and millions displaced. The principle that an aggressor state must pay for the damage it causes is a well-established norm in international law, often referred to as the law of state responsibility. Seizing Russian sovereign assets is therefore a permissible and practical method to ensure that funds are available to begin satisfying Ukraine's legitimate and substantial claim to these reparations. This is fundamentally about ensuring accountability for unlawful actions and providing a measure of justice for the victim. Concerns that such a seizure would be an entirely unprecedented or legally dubious action are also demonstrably unfounded when one examines historical practice. There is, in fact, a clear and compelling historical precedent for seizing an aggressor state's assets to fund reparations. Following Iraq's illegal invasion and occupation of Kuwait in 1990, a very similar situation arose. The international community, led by the United States and its allies, took decisive action. They froze Iraqi state funds held abroad and subsequently facilitated the transfer of these frozen assets to an international escrow account. These funds were then systematically used to finance reparations paid to Kuwait for the damages it suffered. This historical example clearly demonstrates that such actions are not without firm historical and legal support when responding to blatant acts of aggression. It is true that some European officials and financial commentators have voiced certain anxieties regarding the full confiscation of Russian sovereign assets. They primarily worry about potentially violating complex principles of sovereign immunity, which traditionally protect state assets from seizure by other states. There are also expressed fears that such a move could trigger capital flight from Europe, as other nations might become hesitant to hold their reserves in European financial institutions if they perceive a risk of future confiscation. However, upon closer examination, these fears, while understandable, may be significantly overstated in the current, extraordinary context. It is critically important to remember that these specific Russian assets were already frozen over 3 years ago, a very significant intervention in itself. International investors did not engage in a mass exodus of capital from Europe at that time. Unlocking the entirety of the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets and repurposing them for Ukraine would transmit an exceptionally powerful and unambiguous message directly to the Kremlin. Such a decisive action could fundamentally alter Vladimir Putin's strategic calculus regarding the continuation and intensity of the war. It would unequivocally demonstrate that Europe and its global allies are resolutely prepared to provide Ukraine with substantial, long-term and sustainable financial and material support. A key advantage of this approach is that this support would come with relatively few direct domestic political costs for European governments, as it effectively utilizes Russia's own sequestered funds to counter Russia's aggression. This sustained and robust backing could significantly undermine Putin's apparent strategy of attrition, which seems to rely on waiting out Western resolve and Ukraine's diminishing resources. This bold financial maneuver would also significantly bolster Ukraine's negotiating power should viable peace talks ever materialize. If Russia perceives that Ukraine is well-funded, well-supplied, and capable of sustaining its defense indefinitely, Moscow might become considerably more inclined to engage in meaningful, good-faith negotiations rather than pursuing its current maximalist objectives. At present, Putin seems content to prolong the conflict, apparently banking on the eventual erosion of Western aid and the exhaustion of Ukrainian capabilities. Drastically changing this financial reality by injecting $300 billion into Ukraine's war effort and reconstruction could pave the way for a more just and lasting peace. It provides Ukraine with the essential resources to defend itself effectively and to negotiate from a position of relative strength rather than one of increasing desperation. The United States has already taken legislative steps to prepare for such a possibility. The U.S. Congress passed the Rebuilding Economic Prosperity and Opportunity for Ukrainians (REPO) Act in 2024. This landmark legislation grants the U.S. President the authority to confiscate Russian sovereign assets that are held within US jurisdiction and direct them towards Ukraine's benefit. Canada has also enacted a similar law, indicating a growing international consensus among key allies. If achieving a unanimous agreement on full asset seizure across all European Union member states proves to be an overly complex or time-consuming diplomatic hurdle, then individual member states that hold significant Russian assets within their banking systems should seriously consider taking parallel national steps. European leaders could even proactively negotiate with the White House to use seized Russian assets to purchase US-made military capabilities for Ukraine, ensuring a continued, robust supply of vital aid through innovative transatlantic cooperation.